The knock on my truck window came from a kid barely tall enough to see over the door handle. "Can we join you?" I looked down and found two kids standing in the gas station parking lot. A girl maybe 7, hair in 2 uneven braids like she'd done them herself, and a boy behind her, younger, gripping the back of her jacket. No adult in sight. My daughter Ruby, 6 years old, was still buckled in her booster seat behind me, halfway through a juice box, watching the girl with the kind of open curiosity only a 6-year-old has for a stranger her own age. "Join me where, sweetheart?" I asked, already scanning the parking lot for a parent who might be embarrassed and jogging over any second. "Wherever you're going. We don't want to go back to the motel." That stopped me cold. Not because kids say strange things. They do. Constantly, Ruby included, but because of how flat and rehearsed it sounded, like she'd practiced saying it to strangers before. I asked her name. "Willow," she said. Her brother was Eli, 5. I asked where their mom was. Willow looked back toward a rusted Chevy Malibu parked at the edge of the lot, engine running, and said, "She's inside getting cigarettes." She said not to talk to anyone, but you look like a dad, not a stranger. That's the sentence I still think about. You look like a dad, not a stranger. Like she'd already learned to sort adults into those 2 categories, and not much else mattered once she'd made her decision. I'm Marcus Farrell, 34, and at the time I was hauling a load of restaurant equipment through central Ohio on a delivery run, Ruby in the back seat because her school had a teacher in service day and my usual sitter had canceled that morning. I run a small delivery and logistics business out of Zanesville, 3 trucks, 6 drivers, built from nothing after my wife Danielle died in a car accident when Ruby was 2. I'd been raising her alone for 4 years, and in all that time, nobody had ever asked to join us. Willow's mother came out of the gas station 5 minutes later, saw her daughter standing at my window, and yanked her back toward the Malibu without a word to me. No explanation, no apology, just a tight grip on Willow's arm and a look on her face that wasn't anger. It was fear. She had the kind of fear that comes from being watched, not from being caught doing something wrong. I got their license plate without really deciding to. Something about the way that woman moved told me this wasn't the first motel, and it wouldn't be the last strange man's truck window those kids knocked on before someone finally asked the right questions. I didn't know it yet, but that plate number was about to lead me somewhere I never expected, somewhere that had almost nothing to do with strangers, and everything to do with someone I already knew. Danielle died on a Tuesday in October, 4 years back, on the wet curve of Route 40 just outside Zanesville. A trucker jackknifed it ahead of her in the rain, and she never had a chance to brake. Ruby was 2. I was 30, running the business we built together out of a single box truck, and suddenly I was doing it alone with a toddler who cried every time she saw a woman with Danielle's hair color in a grocery store aisle. Danielle's sister, Priya, stepped in for the first year like a lifeline. She'd watch Ruby on delivery days, cook meals I didn't have time to make, sit with me on the nights I couldn't stop replaying the accident report in my head. I trusted her completely. She was the only piece of Danielle I had left that could talk back to me, and I leaned on that harder than I probably should have. Somewhere in that first year, Priya's boyfriend at the time, a man named Curtis Bell, started showing up more. He was charming in the easy way some men are, quick with a joke, good with Ruby, always offering to help with something. He talked me into co-signing a loan for a used box truck he swore would become his own delivery route, splitting fuel costs, splitting jobs, building something alongside my business instead of competing with it. I said yes because Priya vouched for him and because grief makes you generous with people who seem to be filling gaps you don't want to look at directly. The truck never made him a dime. Within 8 months he'd stopped making payments, and I was covering them because my name was the one on the loan. Priya asked me not to push it. "He's trying, Marcus. Give him time." And I did, because pushing felt like betraying her, and Danielle's family was the only family Ruby had left on that side. Curtis and Priya split up about 2 years ago. He disappeared from our lives entirely, or so I thought. I kept paying off that loan quietly, never mentioned it to Priya again, chalked it up as one more cost of trying to keep a fractured family intact for Ruby's sake. Ruby doesn't remember her mother. Not really, just fragments, a perfume smell, a song Danielle used to hum. What she does remember is me, every school pickup, every skinned knee, every bedtime story read twice because she asked. I built my whole life around not letting her feel the absence too sharply, which meant I absorbed a lot of things I shouldn't have, from a lot of people, for a long time. I ran that license plate through a friend at the county clerk's office 2 days after the gas station, mostly out of nagging discomfort I couldn't shake. What came back on the registration made my stomach drop. The Malibu was registered to Curtis Bell. I sat in my truck outside the shop for a long time after that name came back, running through everything I actually knew about Curtis Bell versus everything I just assumed. I called Priya first. She hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, she said, but she went quiet when I mentioned Willow and Eli. He never had kids when we were together, she said slowly. But there was a woman he mentioned once, before me, Tanya something. He said it ended badly. I never asked more. That was warning sign number 1 I'd missed years ago. A man who talked about an ex only in fragments, never in full sentences, like the story didn't hold up to daylight. I remembered something else, too, something I'd brushed past at the time. About a year into the truck loan going bad, Curtis had asked me for an additional $1,200, just to cover a deposit, on a rental he claimed he needed to get back on his feet. I gave it to him because Priya asked me to, because Ruby liked him, because he taught her how to skip rocks at the lake behind my shop one Sunday, and I didn't want to be the reason that stopped. I never saw that money again either. I never really expected to. The pattern was there the whole time. I just hadn't been looking at it as a pattern. I'd been looking at each incident individually, forgiving it individually, because that's easier than admitting you've been financing someone else's chaos for 4 years running. I called the county clerk's office friend again, a woman named Odessa Marsh who'd helped me untangle a title dispute 2 years back. I asked her, off the record, if there was any way to find out whether that Malibu had any other names attached to it. Insurance, prior registration, anything. There's a lien holder listed, she told me. Finance company out of Columbus. And there's a prior registration under a Tanya Reyes, same address, about 18 months back. Tanya Reyes. The name Priya half remembered. I didn't do anything with that information yet. I told myself I was being cautious, not obsessive, but the truth was I'd started keeping a folder. Texts from Curtis over the years, the loan paperwork, the $1,200 Venmo request, screenshots of everything, dated and organized the way Danielle used to file our tax records. I didn't know yet what I was building toward. I just knew I wasn't going to let this go the way I'd let everything else go. That night, Ruby asked me at dinner if we were going to see the Braid Girl again. I told her I didn't know. She said, I hope so. She looked like she needed a friend. Kids notice things we spend years training ourselves not to see. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Unknown number, Ohio area code. Marcus, this is Tanya. Tanya Reyes. Curtis gave me your number, said you might be able to help. Willow's mother. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake Ruby, who'd fallen asleep in my room again after a nightmare. Help with what? Exactly. He told me you two were still close, still doing business together. He said you'd co-sign something for me. A car loan, nothing big. I've got the kids. I need reliable transportation, and my credit's not where it needs to be right now. Curtis had told her we were still close. Curtis had told her I still co-signed things for him. 4 years after the truck loan I was still quietly paying off. 2 years after he vanished from my life, he was still using my name like a line of credit he kept in his back pocket. I'm not co-signing anything, Tanya. And I don't know what Curtis told you, but he and I haven't done business in a long time. She got quiet, then defensive. He said you owed him. Said you two had an understanding. What understanding? I don't know. That's just what he told me. Look, forget it. I shouldn't have called. I didn't let her hang up yet. I asked about Willow and Eli. Careful, not accusatory. She got sharper immediately. My kids are fine. Don't worry about my kids. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a loan anymore. A woman defending her parenting to a stranger on the phone at 11 at night, voice tight like she'd had this exact conversation with someone else recently and it hadn't gone well. That's not a person who's fine. That's a person who's scared of being looked at too closely. I called Priya the next morning and told her everything. The phone call, Tanya's name matching the old registration. Curtis apparently still invoking my name to strangers years after I'd stopped being anything to him. She was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, I need to tell you something. When Curtis and I broke up, it wasn't just because things fizzled. I found out he'd taken out a credit card in my name during our second year together. I never told you because I was embarrassed, and because you'd already lost so much with Danielle. I didn't want to pile on. For years, I'd been protecting a family connection to Danielle by staying silent about Curtis. Priya had been doing the same thing. Silently, for entirely different reasons, and neither of us had ever compared notes. That was the moment I stopped absorbing this quietly. I drove to a lawyer that same afternoon, Odessa's cousin, a family law and financial fraud attorney named Marcus Whitfield, no relation, just a coincidence of first names that made Ruby giggle when I mentioned it later. I laid out the loan documents, the Venmo request, Priya's credit card story, and now Tanya's phone call. This isn't just deadbeat behavior, he told me. This sounds like a pattern of identity-adjacent financial manipulation. If he's been invoking your name to third parties to secure credit or loans, that's worth documenting formally and possibly reporting. I left his office with a plan for the first time in 4 years. Not revenge, just documentation, boundaries, and the truth, finally organized instead of scattered across a decade of my own forgiveness. Marcus Whitfield moved fast once I gave him the folder. Within 2 weeks, he'd sent a formal cease and desist to Curtis, citing unauthorized use of my name and credit history in communications with third parties and referencing the outstanding truck loan I'd been quietly covering for 4 years. He also flagged Priya's credit card situation and encouraged her to file her own report, separately with her bank's fraud division. Curtis called me the day after the letter arrived. No apology, straight to defense. You're really doing this over a truck payment? After everything I did for Ruby. You taught her to skip rocks once, Curtis. That doesn't buy you 4 years of loan payments and my name attached to strangers' credit applications. Tanya's struggling, man. I was just trying to help her out the way I helped myself out with you. That sentence told me everything. He wasn't ashamed of using my name. He saw it as a resource, something Ruby's connection to Danielle's family had entitled him to indefinitely, whether I agreed to it or not. I stopped covering the truck loan payment that same week. Whitfield helped me formally document the default and transfer full liability back to Curtis as the actual borrower of record, since the loan had technically always been in both our names. It wasn't instant. It took the finance company almost 6 weeks to process the liability shift, and my credit took a temporary hit in the interim that Whitfield warned me about honestly up front. But it stopped the bleeding permanently instead of quietly forever. Tanya called again during that stretch, this time crying. Curtis had apparently told her the loan I'd promised to co-sign had fallen through because of me, framing it like I'd abandoned her and the kids out of spite. I stayed calm and told her the truth, that I'd never promised anything, that Curtis had used my name without my knowledge, and that if she wanted help for her kids, a co-sign from a stranger wasn't the kind of help that would actually last. She didn't believe me at first. 2 weeks later, she called a third time, quieter, and said she'd found other paperwork in Curtis's name that didn't add up either. A second loan, this one for a car she'd never seen, taken out under her information without her signature matching what she remembered signing. She filed a fraud report of her own after that, separate from mine, and for the first time mentioned she was looking into a domestic violence shelter's financial counseling program to get Willow and Eli somewhere stable. Priya's bank credited back the fraudulent charges after a formal investigation, though it took most of a year to fully close out. Curtis never faced criminal charges. The finance companies treated it as civil debt liability rather than pursuing fraud charges themselves, and Whitfield was honest with me that proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt would have been a hard case to build. That part stayed unresolved, and I had to accept that. What did resolve was simpler and in the end mattered more. Curtis lost access to my name, my credit, and my patience permanently. Priya and I got closer instead of further apart, finally talking honestly about the parts of grief we'd both been managing alone. And Tanya, slowly, started rebuilding something more solid for her kids than a running engine in a gas station parking lot. It's been almost a year since Willow knocked on my truck window. I never became her father, never adopted her, never turned this into the kind of story where a stranger sweeps in and rescues a family single-handedly. That's not what happened, and I'm glad the truth is smaller and more honest than that. What happened is that Tanya got herself and her kids onto steadier ground, a subsidized apartment 2 towns over from her old motel circuit, a job at a warehouse with actual scheduled hours, and enough distance from Curtis that his name stopped showing up on her paperwork. Ruby and Willow are friends now, genuinely, not just 2 kids who met once at a gas station. Tanya and I set up occasional playdates at a park roughly halfway between us. Careful and low-key. Nothing more complicated than two parents who both understand what it's like to be the only adult standing between your kid and the world's sharper edges. Eli calls me Ruby's dad, instead of my actual name, and I've stopped correcting him. Priya and I talk more openly now than we have since Danielle died. She started seeing a financial counselor after the fraud investigation closed, partly to rebuild her credit, partly, she told me, to figure out why she kept letting people like Curtis convince her that helping them was the same thing as loving them. I understood that better than I wanted to admit. I'd been doing the same math for 4 years and calling it loyalty to Danielle's memory. Curtis reached out once more, about 2 months after everything settled, a text that read, "Hope we can move past this someday. Family's family." I didn't respond. Some sentences don't deserve an answer. And I'd finally learned the difference between staying silent to keep peace and staying silent because someone was counting on it. The gas station is still there on my regular delivery route. I stop there sometimes, more out of habit than necessity now, and Ruby always checks the parking lot without saying why. Last month she finally asked me, "Do you think Willow knew you'd help us that day? Or was she just asking anybody?" I told her the truth. I think she was asking anybody. I think she'd probably asked before and nobody stopped. Ruby thought about that for a while, the way 6-year-olds do when something matters more than they have words for yet, and then she just said, "I'm glad you stopped." That's the part one keep coming back to more than the loan, the lawyer, or the finance company paperwork. Somewhere along the way, being a single dad taught me that protecting my daughter didn't mean building a wall around our life. It meant staying open enough that when someone else's daughter knocked on the window, I actually heard her. I still don't know everything about what Curtis put Tanya and those kids through before that gas station, and some of it I suspect I never will. But I know this. 2 kids asked a stranger if they could join him, and instead of staying strangers, we became the kind of people who show up for each other's Tuesdays. Tell me what you would have done in my position. This fictional story was created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection.